Let me introduce you to Gary Palmucci. Gary?
Thank you, Lori. I'm coming to you again today from the New Plaza Cinemas West End Theater on 86th Street between Broadway and West End. We have 3 sold out shows where our heads are spinning here a little bit at the theater. But having heard that Max was a little under the weather and some support was needed, I'm doing my best here to jump in, and hopefully the internet will continue to cooperate. I want to start off this discussion of Young Man with a Horn with an anecdote that occurred to me, a personal anecdote that occurred to me over the course of this week. I'm recalling back in the summer of 1975, that was a very hot summer, if anybody remembers that particular. I was in a car, a non-air conditioned car, driving from Boston to Philadelphia with a bunch of high school buddies to see a Rolling Stones concert at the Spectrum in Philadelphia. Nemesis of my favorite, the Boston Celtics at that time. But sitting in the car with these high school friends was one young lady whom I had not previously met. And this woman was absolutely stunningly beautiful and articulate and way out of my league at that particular point in my life. And I asked my friends, now, who is this person, a friend of one of you guys, obviously, who they were referring to by the name Zazie, Z-A-Z-I-E. And my best friend at the time said to me, well, she is a relative, possibly granddaughter, I don't remember exactly whom, of a famous jazz musician called Bix Beiderbecke, whom I'd never heard of. My jazz at that point knowledge was pretty much confined to Miles Davis and John Coltrane and maybe Elvin Jones. So that always stuck in my mind, both the charisma of this young woman and that extraordinary name of that musician. So then flash forward about 40 summers later, I saw this film, Young Man with a Horn, at an outdoor screening in the Target Community Garden on Bedford Avenue in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. First time I had ever seen it, with at least 3 iconic actors, Kirk Douglas, Lauren Bacall, and Doris Day of mine. Another supporting actor whom I love very dearly, Juano Hernandez, who plays the character Art Hazard in the film and was in several very important films of that era. One we've talked about showing here at New Plaza Cinema, Intruder in the Dust, based on William Faulkner's novel. Also in Kiss Me Deadly, another classic from the 50s. So that's a terrific lineup of talent, but a film that, and I looked at it again last night, seems to skirt or obfuscate many important issues or things that were just scrubbed clean because of various pressures of the time: drug use, bisexuality, segregation in the music business. And I think that's a lot of what we're probably going to be discussing today. The things that were papered over, that were the facts that were changed to protect whomever or whatever. The character that Kirk Douglas plays, based on Bix Beiderbecke, who's called Rick Martin in the film. And I think it's actually a typically passionate performance by Kirk Douglas from that part of his career. He was about to run off a whole string of terrific performances in the 50s, in Billy Wilder's Ace in the Hole, Vincent Minnelli's Bad and the Beautiful, Stanley Kubrick's Spartacus and Paths of Glory. I think we'll get some of the flavor of this in the trailer that Lori's about to show us. And then we'll get into our esteemed guests here who are going to dissect it several levels beyond anything I've just said, which is going to be great. Lori, fire away, please.
Music. The kind you can't write, the kind you just gotta feel. He played it, and the world cheered at his feet. Listen. Its haunting beat is telling the whole story of his fight to rise above the past, of his climb from Dixieland jive joints to Broadway's starlit roofs, of the strange adventure that brought him into the lives of 2 different and exciting women, 2 dangerous and demanding loves.
Keep away, Richard. Better not take any chances with me. Only people who respect themselves can ever give love fully, freely. I don't happen to respect myself.
It's all too wonderful. I'll never find the words.
What are you trying to do, Rick? Kill yourself because you tried for something that didn't exist. That's what you've done all your life.
You cheap. What a dope I was. I thought you were class, like a real high note you hit once in a lifetime. That's because I couldn't understand what you were saying half the time. Why, you're like those carnival joints I used to work in. Big flash on the outside, but on the inside, nothing but filth.
Well, we see a couple of examples in there, and thank you, Laurie, of what I call the 1,000-mile stare of Kirk Douglas when he's angry, when he's baffled, when he's determined. One of his characteristic tropes as an actor. But to get further into the details of this film, I want to welcome a gentleman who's been on at least 2 of our programs before and really graced them with his wit, his incredible encyclopedic knowledge of jazz, and occasionally his digressions onto the golf courses of Pebble Beach and Augusta National and so forth, where he was, the latter of which he was earlier this week, I just learned. Wayne Winborne, author, jazz expert, musicologist, and you may recall him on our earlier programs on Paris Blues, and also on Stanley Nelson, who was in the limelight just this past month with his Oscar-nominated doc of Attica, which we showed here at our cinema. His equally excellent doc, Miles Davis, Birth of the Cool, still screening on Netflix. So, Wayne, welcome back to at least appearance number 3, if I'm remembering that correctly.
I think I can't remember if it's 3 or 4, but I appreciate that overly generous introduction. A friend of mine used to say, he would say 1 or 2 or 3 very complimentary things, and then he would end it with lovable rogue, which I always like. I like both of those words. I don't know that I'm either, but thank you. It's really great to be with you all again. And it was kind of fun for me to revisit this film. You know, we've talked about folks of our vintage who, you know, as children growing up, sometimes it would be Saturday afternoons. Saturday afternoons, where I grew up in Portsmouth, Virginia, if I'm not mistaken, tended to be westerns, you know, old black and white films. But Friday nights and Saturday nights, as I recall, there was some time when you could catch these old movies. So I'm a little kid looking at movies that were, you know, classics, but 5, 10, 15, 20 years old. And I was always drawn to music. And so, you know, as I say, I watched Paris Blues, for example. I'd watched The Man with the Golden Arm, Frank Sinatra. Is that the title of it? Man with the Golden Arm.
Yes.
And all of the ones related to music, typically. And of course, Young Man with the Horn, I'd seen. And Kirk Douglas seems like he was in every other film that we watched as children. As you say, Spartacus. God, there's another one he does with Robert Mitchum. I can't. But anyway, it's really fun to revisit this because this.
That's Out of the Past, I believe. You're thinking about a classic film noir. That's at least
There
one
we
of the
go.
times they appeared together. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And then you go back and you see the backstory, the slight competition. They were friends and knew each other. The competition. Don't they do a movie later in life? Did they do one as older actors where they were? I can't remember. I think I'm thinking of Atlantic City, but and I'm mixing up Robert Mitchum with Burt Lancaster as well.
I think you're thinking of something called Tough Guys that they did do at the very end, toward the very end of their career. Yes.
Yeah. So it's fun to revisit this and to look at it again now with adult eyes. And I did try to go through it a couple of times. One time I went through it without the sound, interestingly. And you know, I just think the score, which I don't think it's talked about enough, the score is fabulous, and the selection of the music. Obviously, Harry James looms large because he was the trumpet.
He was the soloist who played all the parts, essentially.
Yeah, well, he didn't play Juano Hernandez's parts. That was another trumpet player, Jimmy Zito, um, who was primarily associated with Les Brown's group, and which I'd forgotten about, and forgot that Doris Day was the big star singer with Les Brown and his band of renown, and really elevated Les Brown. There were a lot of great swing orchestras and swing bands. That's one of the great things about the pre-war period was the amount of live music and the quality of it that you could hear, and the contrasting styles. This movie, at least part of it, when Rick is a young man, is, I'm assuming, supposed to be in the 20s, 30s. They talk about Midwest and South, and so this was obviously Kansas City, and that sort of that network between Kansas City and Oklahoma City, and to some degree parts of Texas, but definitely between Oklahoma City and Kansas City. Major throughway for bands, particularly black bands, but a lot of other bands and swing orchestras in those days. And then with the advent of radio, of course, there were lots of opportunities for these musicians to play. So Jimmy Zito was a really fine trumpet player who played with Les Brown, and Les Brown's band was not as far. I agree with this assessment. Of what I've learned is that Les Brown's band wasn't one of the top tier bands like Glenn Miller or Harry James or Basie or Ellington, Fletcher Henderson and Jimmy Lunsford during an earlier period. But Doris Day, when she joined the band, elevated them, and of course she would go on to become Doris Day, and Doris Day and Jimmy Zito would be reunited to some degree because he played Art Hazard's parts, which I actually really enjoyed, and to the degree that this movie is looking at, it's often described as being based on the life of Bix Beiderbecke, but it's based on the novel Young Man with the Horn by Dorothy Baker. And she says very clearly in the intro, your next guest is going to talk a little bit more about that because I know he's recently reread the novel. I haven't. I've just gotten through pieces of it and couldn't put my hands on a copy for today's conversation. But when I know about it, so very interesting things. She makes it clear that it's inspired by his music, but it's not based on his life. That's the novel. The movie is based on the novel. But I have to tell you, Gary, I think it's occurred to me, and I'll be curious to see what other folks say. I think the screenwriters actually may have looked back at Bix's life. There were a couple of interesting parallels that occur. There's some real divergences, as you say. In the novel, Doris Day's character and Hoagie Carmichael's character, Smoke, are both African American.
There's a couple of pretty solid screenwriters worked on it too. Carl Foreman and a guy named Edmund H. North, who 20 years later won an Oscar for co-writing the screenplay of Patton with Francis Ford Coppola.
Was that right? Huh. Yeah. See, that's interesting because one of the other things I like about it, even on some very touchy stuff, right? Like art, the sort of, I saw it as a paternal relationship, a father-son relationship between Kirk Douglas and Juana Hernandez's characters. But it skirts the edge of, that sort of magical Negro thing that we've talked about, where there's this black character who only exists to sort of lift up this white character. Mm. I think the writing's subtler than that, actually. I thought he had a pretty decent backstory. His bands there's the stuff that's left out. The band is all black. His original band is all black, and they only play for white patrons. Which obviously, and what's the name of the club? Gabla's?
Gabla's. Is that based on a real village club of some kind?
See,
G-A-L-B-A.
Yeah, I thought it might be based on a village club. It's certainly, through a nod to the Cotton Club. The only difference being the Cotton Club was in Harlem, but the patrons were mostly white, and they were very clear in making the audience white. And again, the band was all black. By the way. When you go back and look at the film, go back and find this scene, I realized much later the saxophone player in that band is Dexter Gordon, a young Dexter Gordon. Yeah, he doesn't speak, and it doesn't sound like they recorded it on a soundstage, but there are a couple of shots where he's sitting next to him, and there's one full shot, and you can see just how tall Dexter is, but he's very young. I mean, the film was, what do you say, 1950, something like that. Dexter was pretty well known at that point, becoming well known. But I thought with the script he really comes alive in many ways, and he embodies a lot of different things. They explicitly don't talk about race, right? But you can tell that some of the limitations that have faced art are because of his race. But I think the writing is really rich. One of the first things that Art says to him, he uses the word collation to when he offers him, he has a plate of sandwiches, which I had to go look up, and of course it means it's the formal definition of the word, a light meal, a light informal meal. So he makes him an erudite person at the same time that he's this sort of fatherly figure. The funeral scene when he's at the church, you really get a sense of right. This person had a whole another life, and then throughout the film, Kirk Douglas repeatedly takes umbrage when someone doesn't grasp the greatness of this man. What a wonderful musician he is, and influence on him. So I thought they do some subtle things there. They at one point, Art says, I think he uses the phrase. He says, "I'm playing with a heavy mute," which I thought that was so great for
Yes,
a
that's right.
trumpet
More
player.
than once, I think that comes
Oh
up.
yeah,
Yeah.
for a trumpet player to say that, and you get, even if you're not a musician, you get it like, oh, something's paining him. He's not able to sort of give full expression to it.
Now, Wayne, is Art Hazard based on an actual musician, or is he a construction in the
See,
film?
I think he's a construction. So one of the things about this is assuming now that the sort of model for this, which I think it is Bix. Other scholars, and one of these days maybe we can we'll take a look at another film, or maybe the documentary on Bix, and I can help leverage.
Which we'd like to screen at our theater and perhaps have you come and speak about. It was recently restored, I guess, by the Canadian
That's right.
right
Yeah, it
folks.
has been.
They
I
cleared.
tell you, I'd like to bring a friend or two along, some folks who are real
I
scholars.
think that could be arranged.
That would be fantastic. Randy Sankey, maybe Lauren Schomburg. But the thing about Bix, one of the things that a lot of folks agree on is that he clearly listened to a lot of the musicians around him. Knew Louis. Everyone listened to Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong, by all accounts, had great admiration for Bix. But it's hard to see that Bix had one person that sort of influenced him, one kind of mentor. He seems to. I mean, there's always an influence. People don't just pop out of nowhere, but some geniuses do pop out of nowhere. I'm saying that just to say that it's not clear that art was based on someone. I would say if it's anyone, um, you would guess Louis Armstrong, but of course Louis Armstrong outlived Bix, had a great career, was very stable. It's one of the contrasts between them. Louis Armstrong grew up so poor, um, and yet pretty stable marriage, two, but the last one lasted forever, lived a long time, international acclaim. Bix grew up fairly comfortable, and died, in a very unfortunate circumstance by himself, more or less broke in an apartment in Queens. So I'm talking a lot around the answer to this. I don't know. I think it may be a character she constructed, for me, both I assume in the novel, but also with the screenwriters, I think they're using this is another, to me, good writing. So much stuff is subtext. The subtext was not just art versus commercialism, but these musicians who were going against the grain. They wanted to embrace this African American art form, this American art form. Lauren Bacall's character asks, very, do you think it's mostly African? And she says, yes. I know it's our native art form. So in two sentences, she does two things. She centers the music in the black community, but doesn't limit it there, right? She doesn't limit. She says it's ours. She owns it as an American art form for everyone. She's saying it with disdain at the time, but I was fascinated at the writing there, and wished that I could ask those folks some questions. So long-winded answer, I don't know if art is based on. So I couldn't think of anyone in particular other than possibly Armstrong. But that notion of a mentor, clearly he gravitated towards a father figure. There was a warm intimacy between the two of them. That I found interesting, given some of the other themes that they skirt. So let me stop, because you know how I am.
And then, of course, we have this A list of song material in the film. Dick Rogers and Larry Hart, Gershwins, and so forth. That intersecting with a lot of the great jazz we're hearing. It's quite a potent.
It's on a very, very high level, and they make a distinction. Sometimes these subtle distinctions when art is supposed to have lost it, and he's playing. it's it doesn't sound bad. He just doesn't play with the bravura that you'd expect it
And
that had happened earlier.
what are we to infer on that? Does that mean there's a drug addiction issue or
I didn't see
never?
that. I
No.
didn't see that. I thought it was an aging thing, and again, something they don't talk about, the limited opportunities for this band. You know, he had to, again, you never see him performing for a black audience. But the
Mhm.
implication is that Kirk Douglas is going to the other side. I think it's Morrison, the band leader Morrison, who says something like, "You're going to play." I think he uses the term spasm. That spasm music. And Kirk Douglas is so offended. Kirk Douglas is like, if you could something like basically, you know, if you could play half of what, if your music sounded anything like that, it would be so much more meaningful. So I didn't get the drug illusion. That again, this is where I thought they
Well, and
did.
there's the one point where Juano Hernandez says, well, when Kirk Douglas starts to drink really heavily and get out of control, Juano Hernandez tries to get him to get a grip on himself. And he says, well, I was like you at one point. I had the misery, which seemed to be like
The
maybe that was a
misery,
code.
yeah, the
Yes.
misery, yeah. And so what's interesting, I wondered about that. I wondered because the bad, there's no mention of drugs, but alcohol is the big thing, right? And they make
Right.
a big juxtaposition of Art only drinking milk. He has milk for the guys at the beginning when
Very bizarre.
right when young Rick is there. When he goes to the bar, the last scene he has with Rick, he orders milk, by the way, and the milk glass gets shattered after he gets hit. Which I the second time I watched it, I thought, oh, that's actually kind of subtle, a little in thing. He's dying, and the bartender's trying to tell him that someone got hit, and Cook Douglas is too self-absorbed to really grasp it. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was a very interesting thing. By 1950, of course, heroin was strongly associated with jazz musicians and jazz clubs too, over-associated. But they avoided all of that. They only talked about alcohol being the big, which obviously was a huge, huge problem, and was Big Beiderbecke's problem. I mean, alcoholism really, really impacted his career. Last thing I'll say that makes me think maybe they were thinking back to him. There was an incident in a recording studio near the end of Bix's life where he was playing a solo and just froze apparently and just stopped and couldn't finish it. And I don't think they canceled the recording, but they didn't make that take.
Mhm.
And that was literally near the end of his life.
Yes, that's right.
That
That's
people talk about.
played kind of verbatim in the film from
Yeah,
what you're describing.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, this might be a good time for us to bring in our esteemed colleague here, Dan Cahill. I'm sure has been doing his homework while watching another sort of competition from somewhere else in the country, as he explained to us
Yeah,
before, on four wheels.
we'll pass beyond that. Yeah, I'm just going to immediately go to my shared screen and start showing some frames here. This is a film that I've always loved, and lo and behold, each time I see it again, I love it even more. And this time was certainly no exception. When this guy comes on the screen in the first shot of a film, the movie owns me. This guy, Hoagy Carmichael, for those of you who don't recognize him, not only do he and I share some roots, we were born about 100 miles away from each other, a generation and a half difference, but I can really relate to him. Just some of his credits. Oh, he was a composer. He did Stardust, The Nearness of You, Georgia on My Mind, Heart and Soul, some of the most recorded songs in the American Songbook. But I just learned not only did he finish college, but he got a law degree and practiced law for a little while before he went full-time with music. So we can now refer to him as Hoagy Carmichael Esquire. This is Orly Lindgren, who does a bang-up job playing him as a boy. And I rarely say that about a child actor. Young Mr. Lindgren didn't go beyond childhood acting, which is probably best for his overall mental health. But anyway, he does a great job. Here we see him approaching in a now empty church, approaching the piano from way across the room. And when he finally gets there, what does he do? He does what just about everyone teaching him or herself music does. You pick out a tune on the piano. a note at a time. And what makes it work so beautifully with a piano, unlike, oh, a saxophone or a trumpet, is you can see the whole scale right in front of you. It's all there. You know visually where you're playing. Everybody has done this if they've ever learned music, I'm sure. Here we have young Mr. Lindgren in the pawn shop. I just want to say, looking at that face, he could have easily grown into Tom Brokaw, but that's just me. Here we have, once again, this comes up a lot, especially in a Michael Curtiz film, the tropes of film noir. And if you look closely, this is the Club Dixie, as it was called in his hometown of LA. And the Venetian blind patterns are ubiquitous. And even in a movie without a lot of noir content, the style was there in the late 40s. And Curtiz and his director of photography, Ted McCord, used every trick in the book for this film. Here is something I really love. And Wayne, is that the shot with Dexter Gordon on the front row?
I'm doing this something silly. I'm pointing with my pointer. That's Dexter Gordon just over his right shoulder on the left.
Yes, on the
Yeah.
left.
And
Yeah.
since you opened it up, if I can throw this out,
Sure.
this is such a beautiful shot. This, to me, this was like a movie shot. Like,
Oh, yeah.
look at it, the black and white contrast, the man with his arm around the woman's waist, right? The band perfectly situated. I love this. And then the shadows from the top, it's just, I love it, man. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, you said everything I was going to say. It's
Oh, I'm
one of my
sorry.
favorite shots in the movie. It sums up the whole thing. A little adoring boy finding his community, finding his family here through jazz. This is the aforementioned Juano Hernandez, and I will insert the fact that he was in another of our New Plaza films last summer. He played with John Garfield in The Breaking Point.
Ah, that's right.
Also directed by Michael Curtiz, one of my heroes. And what's happening here is he has just spotted little Rick up in the window. And here is little Rick all alone, about to enter this Neverland of joyous music. And he's a little hesitant, as any kid would be. And here comes the collation. And, you know, there couldn't be anything more American than offering somebody a ham sandwich. I just think it's, you know, it's archetypal.
And Daniel, if I can jump in here, this is an example of where so when I first looked at it again, he calls him Mr. Martin. And I kind of bristled a little bit because, of course, in these movies, you would have to have older black men always referring to young white guys as sir or Mr. something. But he's doing it to sort of create a space, I think, for this young kid to feel comfortable. I say it for a couple of reasons. The dynamic between them. Art Hazard is very knowing. He's kind of figured out this kid needs to eat. He's kind of figured some things out. And then at the very end of the movie, he'd called him Rick a couple of times. But then when he's saying goodbye, he calls him Mr. Martin again.
Yes.
Not out of deference, referring to him as that little boy again, as his mentor. Okay, go and do what you have to do. No, it's all right. And I thought that was very, very subtle writing that could have gone off the rails. Sorry to jump in on you.
No, please, you're welcome. This is a fascinating shot, and this begins over Art's shoulder as he's playing the trumpet for a fascinated Rick, still holding his ham sandwich. And the camera moves in on Rick. And I, being the ever watchful cinematography buff, noticed what I thought was a rookie mistake. As the shot progresses, you see a shadow move over Rick's face. And I thought, oh no, what a rookie mistake. That's the shadow of the camera dolly moving towards him. Well, no, what it is, it's the shadow of Art's trumpet superimposed over his face. There can be no better visual reference for mentoring a kid with a trumpet than this particular shot. It's just a classic. We move on in time. This poor unfortunate young man on the left is the only embodiment of Rick Martin between Orley and Kirk. And he has his back to the camera for the whole scene. Well, tough. Anyway, this is the first scene when Art is mentoring him about the role. about misplacing your mouth on the mouthpiece and how it's a really bad habit to get into. I would note it was mentioned only once in the novel, and the clever screenwriters come back to it 3 more times to emphasize it and to give the audience a sense that they really have learned something here about how jazz is made. Here's another shot I just love. It doesn't do much except establish that he's an adult now, but I just love all the visual elements here. We're on a fire escape with a plant on it, laundry blowing in the wind, there's curtains, and at the same time, we're zooming in on Kirk with his horn. This embodies the father-son relationship. There is genuine affection between these two, and you can tell that Rick Martin is really, really listening hard to everything that Art tells him.
In that scene too, Daniel, one of the nice things, again, this is subtle writing, and Kirk Douglas, I think, does a good job. So Art's breaking the news to him that, he's got this opportunity, this gig in New York. And Kirk Douglas is like, well, yeah, cool, I'm going to go with you. Like, it never even occurs to him that he's not going to follow his mentor and be a part of the whole plan. And I love that. He does it so well. Like, well, yeah, of course. Like, wait, what do you mean I can't go? I loved that. That was,
Yeah. Yeah.
it also spoke to his naivete, if you will.
Well, and as I keep saying, Rick Martin has found a family here, a father first, but he's found what was missing in his life previously. Here is a wonderful moment. Rick is playing for the first time with a band that's hired him, and there is Hoagie as Smoke, and you could caption this with what Hoagie is thinking. Holy moly, this kid can play. So it's one of those revelatory moments that it's fun to watch on a bandstand, and here they've singled it out with close-ups for us to admire.
They did a nice thing too, and this helps that Hoagie Carmichael could actually play. You're
Yeah.
absolutely correct. Kirk Douglas is playing. His Harry James. Hoagie Carmichael turns to him like, "Wait a minute."
Yeah.
And he catches it. He puts the cigarette down and he reaches and play in his right hand. He adds a note. He changes the voicing to
Yeah.
fit what has just been played. It's a beautiful moment. It works musically, and for musicians and folks who are serious fans, they will absolutely catch it too.
Oh, yeah.
Both the substance of it and the visual meaning.
And
Yeah.
it's sort of unfortunate that I can only do still frames for copyright reasons, but anyway, you get the point. This is sort of a magical moment that happens. Here she is, the girl next door, and I just want to put in a plug for her as a really good actress. And if you doubt me, ignore all the outraged virgin roles that she played later in her career and take another look at Hitchcock's The Man Who Knew Too Much. She is brilliant in that. And here she does what she has to do. She's a singer and you really like her.
Also, Love Me or Leave Me, Dan, with James Cagney. She holds her own there too, I think.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Here is another noir trope. You've got a girl, they didn't call her a woman at the time, but you've got a female person coming down the steps. Might as well cast a big shadow on the wall next to her. Why not? We've got the lights, the setups here. Let's make it look a little mysterious. And here again, once another cigarette scene. This movie must have been underwritten by the tobacco industry. They're having a smoke against a very fake, but still gorgeous background. Here is another band. This is the White Band that was led by Mr. Chandler, was the character's name. And this brings to mind something that happened in real life. This is the jam session that Rick suggests while the band is on break and gets him fired from the band. But it reminds me that I read that Kirk Douglas made a suggestion to the producers, director, and probably to the writers as well, that they have a scene where once they're in New York, that the band goes up to Harlem to jam with the black folks up there. Well, the studio said no to that. So here he is doing it, at least for this moment in his career, with a white band, which made it a lot more palatable, I guess. I just love this. This is one of the benefits of playing tawdry dive jazz is you get chorus girls jumping and jiving right above you. And clearly they're having a good time, although this is not where they want to be ultimately musically, but it pays the rent. And once again, a favorite scene. It's no big deal. It doesn't advance the plot, but these two guys are clearly having a really good time sharing some music together. This is a bullying sort of hazing scene. And I show this only because the guy doing the hazing, the heavyset guy with the cigar in his mouth, is a familiar character actor named Dan Seymour, who did this kind of thing all through his career. Otherwise, the scene is just kind of embarrassing to watch. Here we have a goodbye scene as Rick is heading off to New York, and he says goodbye to Smoke, and Smoke tries to persuade him to, oh, come home with me, meet my mom and dad. And part of the persuasion is he says, Indiana's real nice this time of year. There, I got the plug in. Okay. Now, Rick gets to New York, and once again, the tobacco influence, I couldn't resist showing this. Anybody who knows Times Square from the old days recognizes the emerging camel sign over his left shoulder.
In Midnight Cowboy and many other films, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And if you look real close here, it's a little hard to see, but out of the mouth of the smoker comes a periodic smoke ring. That was part of the charm of Times Square at that time. So they didn't ignore that in his passing through.
Dan, it almost looks like they stole a couple of those shots in Times Square with a hidden camera or something. It was a nice,
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably that was sort of a, you put it in the back of a van or something, and you can get away with it. Here is the aforementioned Galba's Club. And I just want to make note of the fact that not only is it downtown in the village, but it's downstairs, as a lot of noted jazz clubs are, especially the Village Vanguard and the recently deceased Jazz Standard. But it's worth noting that the jazz clubs in Paris were so universally in basements that the jazz fans referred to each other as troglodytes. Here we have another scene. This is him playing in Galba's with Art Hazard on the right. Dexter does not appear to be in this scene, so I think we can move on fairly quickly. The entrance of the femme fatale, who is no good for Rick or for anybody, frankly. And one clue is that her entrance features a mirror, which often says, oh, there's more than meets the eye to this person. She has a dual personality, watch out. And similarly, in a scene shortly thereafter, her face is half in shadow. That's another trigger that there's trouble coming from this person. And sure enough, she sends him out of her apartment, instructing him to turn off the lights. And as if that weren't insulting enough, the bird squawks at him. Now, I flunked ornithology, but I think that's either a cockatoo or a cockatiel. I never knew the difference, but
You got me.
yeah. Here is a scene that I admire just for the way it was directed. This is when Amy decides not to spend the night in Rick's somewhat downtrodden apartment. And we see that she leaves, she gets on the elevator, she gets off the elevator in this camera setup and walks towards the camera and then stops and realizes, hey, I'm going to go back and visit that guy again. Now, I'm citing this only because you'll all be pleased to know that the stalwart folks in Ohio, the censors decided to cut this scene entirely and just have it end with her getting on the elevator and leaving. So she stayed wholesome for this part of the film, at least.
Amazing.
Here is the scene that Wayne just referenced. Right after Art was struck by a car, and Rick knocks over his own glass and Art's milk glass. And you can see some of the spilled milk on the bar there, which he is almost about to cry over. This is near the end of the film, after Rick has fallen in the street and a taxi has run over his trumpet. And I'm just calling our attention to this because the trumpet itself with the bent bell is a symbol of the great Dizzy Gillespie, who was reaching his prime at about this time. And Dizzy had a lot of stories, various conflicting stories about how the trumpet got bent, but none of them featured a taxi running over it. I will say that. They were original here. This is a shot that I just could not resist including because it's sort of a triumph of arty urban landscape. And I looked at it closely. The lighting is just extraordinary. But what happened is that Ted McCord inserted a darkening filter over the top right section of it at a diagonal angle. You can see that dark line moving through the upper right or standing still through the upper right. It's a little hokey, but God, it just says, here's a guy lonely in the big city.
Where are we here? The meatpacking district or somewhere nearby? Can you pinpoint that?
Could be a lot of different places.
Yeah.
I have no real idea, but this was something that they shot clearly on a Sunday morning or something when there was no traffic around.
Yeah.
And this is the ending, which I refer to as the sappy, happy ending that nobody who's read the book is happy with. I'll spill the beans that in the book, Rick Martin dies mainly of alcoholism and frustrated career stuff. But Hollywood had to have him back playing with Jo, his favorite songstress, at the end just to cheer us up. I can look over it, but we have to acknowledge that it's there. So, gentlemen, that's the end of my presentation. Sorry to run a little long, but I hope you enjoyed it.
Terrific as usual.
Thank you.
I haven't actually seen one in a while, so this is really a treat.
Okay.
Now, Lori, is there anything we want to show here before we go to questions about upcoming programs?
No, I'll open it for questions. So
Okay.
if anybody has any questions, please.
Lori,
Yeah.
excuse me, before we go to Q&A, there is one factoid that I have to share. And I know Gary and Wayne have already heard this, but it always gets a laugh. I heard years ago that under the current title, Young Man with a Horn, the film was unreleasable in the UK because horn is a slang term for, brace yourselves, an erection. Well, they busied themselves and changed the title. And when I told our absent friend Max about this, he said, well, I got to look this up. I got to research this. And he found a review. He found a review from 1950, somewhere in England. And the movie had been retitled Young Man of Music. And as if that weren't bad enough, in the body of the review, they acknowledged that it had a different title in America, which was simply Young Man with a Trumpet, as they referred to it. So they couldn't bring themselves to use the H word. Just thought that would give you an interesting perspective on international versions of English.
That was Chase Spritz.
Well, it's a great, that's, I love that, I love that story, the 12-year-old in me. I
Yeah.
should say the 12-year-old in me, I guess I'm still a 12-year-old. It's just great. It's a good title, interestingly, and because it's so familiar that you think it's been used a lot. It actually hasn't been used a lot. And she titled her novel after an article, wait, am I telling this right? Wait, there's an article by the, Otis Ferguson, who used to write for the New Republic.
Mhm.
He wrote a short article about Bix, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, and this is a couple of years after he died. And the article was called Young Man with the Horn. And then he wrote another one called Young Man with the Horn Again. And at that time, it sort of revived interest in Bix and his playing, which was beautiful and lyrical. And obviously, maybe the biggest thing he did was just influence a whole cadre of musicians who came after him. The majority of them were white, but really important musicians in jazz with his playing. And so she writes the novel after that. And I think she knew Otis Ferguson, too. I was trying to dig that up. I'm not totally clear about that.
He was a pretty good film critic in his day, too, primarily in the 40s.
He was music and a film critic, right? I'm mostly familiar with the music criticism, but he did write film criticism at some point, too, right? I guess, Gary?
Yes.
Yeah, he's known for that.
Yeah, so it's such a good phrase. You think, it feels so comfortable. You think it's been used. I think it's been used a lot post that, but I believe that he and then she are the ones who popularized it.
Okay, let's bring on the Q&A if there are any.
All right, doesn't seem to have any questions, guys. If you go to your reaction button, you can raise your hand. You know, it was interesting when I watched the movie in prep for this. I thought in my head, Lauren Bacall was the older of the two, when in fact she's actually 2 years younger than Doris Day. And
Right.
I think I just associate her as being older because of her relationship with Bogey.
Yeah.
And I have to say, even though Doris plays that chaste virgin so much, she's part of the underground jazz stuff as well, which is a little, for Doris Day, a little heady.
Yeah. Well, she was very familiar with art, and she talked about going to those clubs. And yeah, her character is pretty pure of heart. I mean, it's interesting. I'm not a gigantic fan of hers, but you know, she has such a beautiful instrument, and the setting of those particular tunes and those arrangements are just perfect for her, in my opinion.
Yeah.
She's able to convey so much emotion. You know, she's not trying to do a whole lot. You know, she knows she stays within herself, and I think it just work. I think it works beautifully. I like the juxtaposition between Lauren Bacall and Doris Day's character. One of the things that kind of gets lost is, aside from the you know the sexuality issue, it has to do with gender roles generally. Lauren Bacall at one point says, you know, you found what you love. You know, I envy that. You know, I've got to do something. I've got to find my thing, you know. And I'm doing a bad job of paraphrasing this conversation. But Kirk Douglas's his response is something like, "Well, you're married now. You know, you don't need to." And the subtext for me is career. You know, you don't. What do you find yourself? You're married. What's the problem? And Doris Day's character seemed to be more along the lines with respect to how she accepted things with the band, and even when I think it's Chandler, when Rick Martin first gets hired, he gets her to hand out the arrangements. He doesn't go hand the arrangements out to the band. He has her do it. And so Lauren Bacall is sort of pushing up against that, obviously with respect to who she is and who she would love inside, but also in terms of finding her place, what she wants to do with herself, not just settle in and be a wife. I thought that was a really interesting juxtaposition.
And it calls for Lauren Bacall to head off to Paris with a woman at the end of the film. So
I thought that was pretty heady for the time. I mean,
she's
Yeah.
on the wild side there.
Body language was unmistakable.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
I want to say one other thing about Doris is that she kind of represents the dance music side of these bands. And one thing I really admire about the movie is that it presents the more popular dance band people with bigger audiences, admittedly, and it contrasts it with the smaller audiences of people who just want to listen to the instrumental jazz and don't need words. And it does not take a stand of one versus the other. It kind of makes jazz look good in that it makes a broad range of people very happy. And I will point out one other thing that you don't see often in jazz films is a lot of the scenes dramatically hinge on how someone reacts to someone's solo.
Yeah.
And you get these, again, warm feelings about what jazz does to people who play it and who listen to it. And this movie should be championed just for that alone.
I think that's a really good point, and I think it's part of what I was saying around. You know, this is pretty good. They present a lot of arguments that folks have in jazz. Nobody's listening to this. Nobody was listening to Lester Young with Basie's band. People just wanted to dance, or more recent arguments. You know, part of what's helped kill the audience for jazz is that you can't dance to it. Folks started taking these longer and longer and longer solos, and they started taking it further and further out, and you're going to lose a mass audience. And so I thought they captured a lot, with respect to the music, even as there are all of this subtext, you know. And again, the art versus commerce thing. To a lot of folks, it was fascinating to me. I was thinking to myself, they're not going to sound like he's playing his solo. You see the sweat coming off him, so you can't tell if it's because he's intensely killing it or is he falling apart. And then he just stops playing. I'm thinking the average person isn't going to know that he didn't sound that great. They're not going to think that wasn't a bad solo, right? When they say art had lost That's a
Yeah,
pretty
it
nice
is.
little lyrical solo, you know. But both in terms, as you rightly point out, and it's so important, both in terms of the reaction of Doris Day and Kirk Douglas, and the other, and he looks at her, his face doesn't change. Is that what did you call
Thousand
it, Gary? The
miles,
thousand
thousand
yard
miles
stare,
there.
and he gets back and says, "Thousand miles stare," and then he looks at her and goes, "I hear it. I hear what you're saying." This is one of the great things and one of the challenges about jazz. You know, so much of what's going on is happening in the musicians' heads, and the listener has to try and follow along. I mentioned Dexter Gordon. Dexter Gordon, when I first started listening to him in high school and college, one of the things Dexter would do, because the older cats used to do this all the time, they would quote melodies from other songs all the time.
Oh, yeah.
That's a big thing, right? Well, Dexter was the first one to do that. And in the middle of something, he'd play, How High the Moon. Wait, where is he pulling that from? He'd play Indiana. He used to love to quote, or he'd quote other stuff, And so there are all of these. Part of what makes it a challenge for an audience member is you have to be able to hear well enough to sort of follow what the musician's doing, and you make inferences as to what's going to come next, what's going to be funny. You'll see some folks who do a lot of gyrations and stuff. Part of it, I think, is to help people understand what's going on. But for the most sophisticated audiences, they're catching stuff that's almost invisible. And so for the filmmaker to have picked up on that and use the actors' faces to convey, right, what they're interpreting and what they're making interpretations about what the musician's doing in his hand, I thought it was great. And it worked. It actually worked too.
I think we have 3 raised hands now, so
Yeah.
let's go.
Before we do that, someone had asked a question. Another great aspect of this film is the quality of the sound unique to Warner Brothers and Vitaphone. Could you please comment on that? I don't think Vitaphone was long gone at this point. Anyone else want to make a comment on that?
Well, I think they were connected with the sound department at Warner Brothers in the early sound era. If you go back and look at those credits, having seen a lot of those Warner Brothers pre-coders and so forth, I think we see Vitaphone's name on the credits in the sound department. Maybe there was still a connection in the late 40s.
Could be. Anyone else want to comment on that?
The sound quality is excellent. I mean, you hear what you need to hear, and it sounds great.
And it looks great. I mean, I think it's a very I love the black and whites and the shadows. It's just and the sound is great. The soundtrack itself, if I'm not mistaken, was released by Columbia Records.
Oh, was it?
Yes, and did very, very well. Did very, very well, and it did well for Harry James and Doris Day, who somehow managed to negotiate. I think they split their royalties, but it was. I forgot. I should know this. I didn't take this note down, but I want to say it was 5%, 6%, something like that. But it was a chart. The record itself charted that year in 50 and 51.
No CD release, I'm assuming.
That dance hall was a real place, I think, on the beach, like in Santa Monica or Venice or something, right? That was not a set in the early scenes of the film. That large.
I wondered if it was in Hermosa Beach. I did. I don't remember now, but I for some reason or another I was thinking that. And I agree with you. I think it's an actual place.
Yeah, it looked real.
Yeah.
All right, Karen.
And thanks for Gary. Thanks for suggesting that it was the meatpacking district. I kept thinking to myself, are they down in Lower Manhattan or are they on the Brooklyn side? I kept wondering if that was in the Williamsburg Savings Bank, that tall building in the back.
Well.
But I think you're right, because I was trying to figure that curved L train. That would only have to have been for it to have turned that much. I was trying to think where that could be. That could be in the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn. I think the J over there, or the meatpacking. And I think you're right. I think it's the meatpacking district. The cobblestone streets. Yeah.
See if somebody speaks up on that.
Karen Daly, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, and first of all, thank you all for this wonderful presentation. I just watched the movie, but now I want to watch it again with your insights. But I want to hear, I'd like to hear your comments about Hoagy Carmichael. Now I'm just learning about Bix and been reading a fair amount. And according to what I've read, they were friends in real life.
They were.
And Hoagy, in fact, tried to help him at the end of his life. So I'm just sort of curious about him showing up in this movie. And I'd like to get your opinions about that, about their real life relationship. Thank you.
Well, they were good friends. Carmichael reportedly wrote Stardust based on something he'd heard Bix play. Am I getting that right? Was it Stardust? Yeah, Stardust, based on a solo that he'd heard him play. Hoagie Carmichael moved between a lot of different worlds. I didn't know he was a lawyer, but he was a very, very, very respected composer. He was a pretty good pianist, as you can see. And then he did some acting. He was um, didn't he do two movies with Doris Day? He was in maybe four or five films where he had
Oh, yeah.
speaking parts. And this one is this. I'm Daniel. Please, you guys jump in on this. But after you finish that, I'm curious about the screenplay. If you think that that narrator, that particular thing to do, to have him sort of, okay, he's the voiceover. He's not just the voiceover. He's telling the story. If that was added on after the fact because it was too much to try and convey in the film, or if they wrote it that way.
It's hard to know these things without our hands on a shooting script, but they often emerge in the editing process where people feel a need to know more, or it may be just that they kind of liked Hoagie's wise voice coming in from time to time. He really does. He soothes my soul, I'll say that. And I want to give a credit to the other screenwriter, Carl Foreman, who was blacklisted and did not receive his proper screen credit on The Bridge on the River Kwai. He also wrote and produced The Guns of Navarone, a pretty good action film for its time. He had a lot of good credits and suffered mightily in the blacklist, which of course we all know Kirk Douglas helped to destroy with Spartacus.
Right.
But that's
That's
another
right.
story.
Yeah, I don't want us to skip over Karen's question though. What did you guys have to say about Hoagie and Bix's friendship, their relationship? Because they were lifelong friends and played together at one point.
I don't know that much about it. Gary, do you have
No,
any?
I have nothing to add about that, unfortunately.
Yeah, as I say, I'm pretty certain Stardust is Hoagie Carmichael's too. And I'm getting things so mixed up these days. In old age, people, it's not for the faint of heart.
Yes,
Um,
no.
but yeah, I'm pretty certain Hoagie wrote Stardust, and again, that was there's some solo somewhere. It either inspired. He didn't lift exactly what Bix played, but it inspired him to write that. They played together. Hoagie was obviously at this point people knew him, but he was a big promoter of Bix. Bix came really made a lot of money. Made a lot of money. He did make money, but we're talking about jazz, so it wasn't like a ton of dough. But he playing in Paul Whiteman's orchestra and getting a lot of work there, but apparently chafed at that at times, wanting to improvise, wanting to be in a smaller group where there was more freedom of expression. And for dances, of course, people liked hearing, the familiar thing. So, and yes, near the end of his life, it wasn't Hoagie Carmichael who found him; it was someone else. He had returned to New York. I'm going to get some of this wrong. He had returned to New York and struggled a bit. He did there are some recordings that come from that, but he was living in an apartment in Queens and drinking heavily. And apparently there were a number of people who had tried to help him, tried to get him to stop drinking, but he wasn't able to do so, combating a number of demons. So.
And I just have to kick it back a few minutes to Gary's mention of the documentary. Is this the one by Brigitte Berman called Bix Ain't None of Them Play Like Him Yet?
That's right. Released in the 80s, apparently had some rights issues, was out of distribution for a long time, had a restoration, is now back in release, and the distributor would very much like us to play it in our theater.
Let's do it.
Down to the Metrograph for a few shows, and so I hope we can, between us, we can work that out in the coming weeks. That would be a great thing to do.
And we'll bring on some chorus girls at the intermission. Okay.
Well, Dan, in that theater, chorus girls would be we don't have a proscenium or a stage or anything where the chorus girls can be shown to their full advantage.
You
Unfortunately,
got a lot of space there. You can fill that up with some female pulchritude.
okay.
No. We're gonna have to have. We will have chorus people, guys, and we will.
You're right. You're right. Sorry.
We have a broad audience we want to appeal.
I know.
To, so.
I slipped back to the 40s. Excuse me.
Well,
All right.
listen, there were chorus guys and chorus
I'm
women
sure.
in the 40s too. They just didn't get the love. So we'll embrace all of them.
Good.
All right. Let's ask Joshua
can
to
you hear me?
unmute.
Yes.
If you'd like to start your video.
Okay.
We can, Joshua.
I think it's always thought it is an absolutely wonderful movie because of the script itself and the story itself, and the music is just phenomenal. I own the DVD and I've seen it a number of times. It's very, very special. And I want to thank you guys for your insights. I'm going to play it again with the knowledge and perspective I've gotten from you. It's always worthwhile. What I was going to say is apropos of very little in terms of what you talked about. My late mother grew up in her childhood in North Adams, Massachusetts. And the family lore was one of her childhood classmates was a guy named Marty Meltzer, who turned out to be the agent for and ultimately married Doris Day.
Yeah.
So that was family lore that is again apropos of nothing in terms of your presentation, but just it brought back a lot of memories to me. Thank you.
No, I think, thank you. I think that totally fits. I read something that I have to defer to the film scholars here, but I read something that said Kirk Douglas had advised Doris, like that guy Marty had been his financial manager, or he'd had some dealings with him, and he didn't think much of him. He thought he was a crook or not, was something like that. And he advised Doris Day not to, not to work with him. And she completely ignored that. During the filming, this is what I remember reading somewhere, doing all this digging. And she ignored him. He did become her manager, and she married him. And then when he died in the 60s, she found out he had, in fact, swindled her.
Yes.
He had apparently was nailed for not only swindling her, but for not paying income taxes on her behalf. So he was not a great guy. He was not he didn't get the Congressional Medal of anything.
And then his son, Terry Meltzer, of course, had that close brush with the Manson family there, which we see in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah.
He was a producer, I guess, a young music producer in LA.
That's his son?
Yeah.
I believe so, yeah.
Oh, okay. It's crazy.
Small world.
Small world. Small world.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Joshua. Marty, you're up next. If you could unmute and start your video.
I just wanted to point out that, wait a minute, I've tried to start video. That the documentary is available on the internet under Rare Film, RAREFIL.
I know that gentleman. That's not a legitimate. I mean, he's an okay guy, but that's not a legitimate copy of that film, and probably not the restoration that was lovingly done up in Canada a couple of years ago.
Good. Well, I was watching it, finding it interesting, and I wanted to make sure that you didn't go to the trouble to screen it and have people find out they can just stream it. So
there's many films we could say that about that are shown in revival houses and other movie theaters, but I think we're going to present this as a first-rate version, which with all due respect to my friend whose name is escaping me at the moment, that is not.
Yeah, the date of the posting is 2021. But that's fine. I just thought you should be aware that it's out there in some form or another.
Yes, but a presentation in our theater with our big screen with Wayne and some of his distinguished friends, that would be something else again, we think.
Oh yeah, and normally what you show is probably not available streaming. I just wanted you to be aware that this thing's out there.
Well, thank you. That reminds me, I haven't looked at his site in a while, that gentleman.
Yep, you can Google Big Spider Beck documentary, and it's on page 2.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marty. Well, I don't know if you're Marty, but
it's
Lou Brothers.
It's free.
Okay, thank you. Lou Brothers, you want to unmute and start your video? Lou? All right, we'll get.
I'm
there we
here.
go.
Sorry.
Hey, Lou. It's okay.
Okay. I just wanted to let you know, in case people were concerned, I did check. There is a CD release of the soundtrack of this movie. It's available on Amazon for $11.98.
Wonderful.
What label has released the CD? That'll tell me.
It's an import, which surprises me because of the $11.98 price tag. Usually those are a little more expensive. Let me see if there's a label name on the back.
Let's hope they're legitimate.
Soundtrack Factory.
That sounds
Soundtrack
like
Factory. I've heard of them.
Sounds like a bootleg. It's only because it was. I'm pretty certain it was Columbia Records, which is a big deal.
It could well be, but the copyright may be gone, and so anybody's free to issue it now if they can get hold of them.
Given those
the
artists,
tapes.
probably not. Those masters have probably been sold and bumped around, and they were old enough, and for whatever reason, they may not have been reissued as a CD. It's possible that overseas licensing, but I would be shocked if Columbia just let those, with Harry James and Doris Day, and given the material, they're all standards. It was a hit record at the time. I'd be shocked if that just passed into public domain.
The Gershwin and Dick Rogers catalogs are probably under tighter control than that, right?
Oh, no question. Yeah, no question. But listen, bootlegs find their way all the time. That's I'll tell you, it's certainly worthy of being re-released for a dance band and swing fans. The soundtrack's good, man. I'm telling you, it's really. You can go down a rabbit hole because they're playing it so well. Harry James is very, very identifiable in his style. He was he's clearly coming out of a classical thing. Big sound, very straight. The use of the vibrato. Jimmy Zito's a little subtler in the beginning. This is one of the things I like about what he does with Art Hazard's playing. It's a little subtle in the beginning, and because he's trying to contrast with where Rick Martin's going to go. Jimmy Zito's a really fine musician, and you can find some great recordings. He had his own orchestra for a while. I don't think it did so great. He at one point he was in the Tonight Show band with Doc Severinsen. Because I kept seeing these pictures with Papa from him. I said, man, I feel like I've seen this guy. And I have an image of him with the sort of 70s. He's got all this hair and like a thick mustache. And there we got that Doc Severinsen, that band was an incredible band. You had some guys who had been in Count Basie's band, Snooky Young, Pete Chrisley, Ernie Watts later.
Guitarist Pete Chrisley, right?
Wasn't
excuse me, sax player.
Wasn't
with
Ray
Steely
Brown
Dan.
in that band?
I don't know that Ray Brown during that time, it's possible he may have passed through, but Ray Brown spent a number of years in what was Merv Griffin's band with Jack Sheldon.
All right.
And they did very, very well. And this was post Ray and Ella Fitzgerald had gotten divorced at this point. Yeah, they're divorced, but Ray's out in LA firmly doing studio work, did a lot of work for Quincy Jones. He played on a lot of soundtracks. And he spent a lot of time. When Merv Griffin had that afternoon show, I think it was called the Merv Griffin Show. I feel like it would come on at like 2 or 3 in the afternoon. I'd come home, my grandmother would be watching. So, but yeah, that soundtrack is that's pretty good soundtrack.
Yeah, we'll look for it.
Yeah.
All right, we have one last question. So if anyone else has a question, please use the reaction button to raise your hand. And Marjorie, can you unmute and start your video, please?
Marjorie, last but not least.
Definitely.
Definitely not least.
I want to thank you all for all of these great incidentals that just made this movie even much more alive than when I saw it. But one part that really emphasized the father and son relationship that Hazard had with Kirk Douglas. Way at the beginning of the film, he tries to tell him that music isn't enough. You need other things in your life, and you can see where he was lacking, and you see how Kirk Douglas, it just went over his head like a warm breeze, But I thought that was such a very sentimental moment at the beginning of the film. Thank you. It was a great presentation.
Thank you.
As I keep saying, this film rewards repeated viewings. There is a lot of stuff in it, And I'm really very pleased to hear all the people who want to go back and watch it again after hearing our talk back today. That does my heart good.
That's right. That's
You
the
know,
best we can ask for.
I did notice throughout the movie, and it's just one of those things that caught my attention, and I made a point of looking throughout, is that he only used 2 fingers to play Kirk Douglas. He never uses the 3rd finger. It's just something, it's a weird detail, but I just like, once I saw it, I was like, now I got to watch to see. And he never uses his 3rd finger.
Yeah, you've planted that in my head. I'm gonna have to go back.
I know, right?
And we wonder who coached him on holding the trumpet. Somebody else. Somebody
I think
must have
Harry
done
James
that.
did. I think Harry James coached him. Yeah.
I don't know, but I just noticed every time he played, he never used the 3rd valve. And I was like a little confounded by it. But you all watch it again and tell me if I'm right or not.
All right, frame by frame.
I know you're going to, Wayne.
You know I'm going to. It's so funny how I love all kinds of music. Obviously, I'm a jazz head. Back when I used to play, or think I was playing it, I played saxophone. I love the saxophone, and obviously
Beautiful.
saxophone is so important to American music. But the trumpet, we used to say, man, the trumpet players and the trumpet is in the ascendancy. And if you look at movies, it's just so funny how there are these indelible moments with trumpet players. We looked at Paris Blues. Even though neither one of them plays trumpet, it's Louis Armstrong's character who shows up and plays all this bravura trumpet. This particular movie, if you guys ever look at, oh my God, what's the movie where Richard Gere and Edward Norton? Richard Gere's the lawyer who gets snookered into defending Edward Norton, who's
Primal Fear, is that the
Primal
name?
Fear.
Primal
It's got a
Fear.
great
Mid-90s.
trumpet. It's got this great solo trumpet throughout. It's Terrence Blanchard at the time.
Taking a vacation from Spike.
Exactly. And Terrence Blanchard is a great film composer and just wrote a great opera. And then there's another one I can't think of it, but again, this recurring thing around the trumpet is very, very important. And so I love that they picked, obviously because she was inspired by Bix, but for that to be, and it plays a role in this film, for that to be the centerpiece. It's his relationship to his art, it's his relationship to his music, but also this instrument. And the instrument becomes a part of the film in the ways that it's broken. Yes, Dizzy's bent, and Dizzy did have a lot of different stories. I go with the one where someone accidentally stepped on it. If you sat on a trumpet, I don't know that you'd bend it, but he was at a band stand, he set it down. And so, but Dizzy was a very smart, very funny guy. He knew what he was doing when he was putting people on,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
But the trumpet in this film, it physically becomes important, and then representationally, it's his art. And you see this again and again in all these films. It's so fascinating and interesting. I'm sorry. I was going to say something else because there's a film score. Oh my God! It's a detective talking about film noir. Old age, you guys. I can't think what it is.
Where the trumpet figures heavily. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Laura?
Chinatown, I guess, comes to mind immediately.
Yeah.
But that's not in that same realm. And also Montgomery Clifton, From Here to Eternity, when
From
he's
Here
playing
to
the trumpet, that's
Eternity,
very dramatically important.
And
What about High Society with Louis Armstrong?
Yeah.
I mean, that was central, the trumpet.
That's
there.
very central. Thank you. That's right. High Society. Yeah.
I've never been able to bring myself to see that, perhaps unfairly.
All right. Well, we're done with questions. Thank you for a wonderful presentation, gentlemen. Now I'd like to throw it to Sean Moore. Did you have something, Daniel?
A special thank you to Wayne. You contributed so much, and we want you back, and we'll find ways to make that happen.
Oh, I appreciate it, you guys. I really enjoy this, and I'm that kid in the movie theater. I'm that kid who my best friend and I would go see double features in downtown Portsmouth, and after we'd finished our work, watch a double feature back to back.
Sure.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Can't get enough.
Yeah. No, it was great. It's story. Human beings tell stories, whether we're sitting around fires or we're sitting in West Africa trying to warm ourselves, or if we're in a Vienna opera house, or in the theater,
or at the Village Vanguard.
Yet to visit, but I'm gonna visit. I promise, Sean, I'm gonna come.
No, Daniel, we never talk at the Village Vanguard.
No, we don't. We're listening to the stories coming
You
off
only
the
listen
platform.
to the stories.
Dan, she's laughing because literally that's how Sean and I met. She and her loud friends at the Vanguard were behind me. And literally, this is the only, I don't know what, this is divine intervention. It is the only time where I didn't shush people in a jazz club. For some reason, it bemused me. And at the end of the set, I turned around and was like, where are you guys from? You're clearly not from New York. They were talking the whole time. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it.
I've learned my lesson since, I swear. I know better now. At any rate, thanks, Wayne. Thanks, you guys. It was really, really great. I just want to spend a minute or two talking about what we have coming up. I'm going to start out by first saying, if you're in New York and you have a chance to stop by our theater, I really, really hope you will. We just had a great weekend with Coda and Donbass. And
Donbass, the Automat.
the Automat, and many sold out shows. And I hope, Gary, that we'll have all of them back next week so people who couldn't get in can get
That's
in.
right. Plus the Norwegian film, The Worst Person in the World, beloved by many foreign film goers this year. Oscar nominee, now available to us to show. So that's going on the program.
If you're in New York, if you're visiting New York, stop by. It's a great space. It's a great theater. So I want you to know that. But then our virtual programs coming up. We've got on the 19th of April, we've got our last film craft, but it's the film composer, which will be a great, great session. That's on Tuesday. On Wednesday, the 20th, Max is doing a lecture on Billy Wilder, and that's going to be just awesome for those of us. I mean, Billy Wilder has so many good films, and it's going to be a great, great lecture. And then on the 24th, we're doing a talk back about the movie The Apartment, with the great Jack Lemmon and I mean, Fred McMurray and Shirley MacLaine. It's just awesome. But in addition to that, you get more. We have Joseph McBride, the author and film historian. Joseph McBride is going to be joining us, and he's written a book about Billy Wilder, and so that's going to be just a really, really great talk back. So
that's a real coup getting Joe McBride on the program, by the way.
It's big. It's very, very big. So I hope all of you can sign up and join us for that, because that will be a very wonderful discussion. So. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming. Good to see everyone, and we hope to see you soon. Bye.